Hey, welcome to Horror Ecos. Before we start, just a quick note. After the first few minutes, the rest of the video plays without breaks. So get comfortable and give it a try. I think you'll enjoy these stories. If you do, you can like and subscribe. Only if you really want to. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time it is for you? I read them every night. All right, let's begin tonight's story. Stories start now. I heard two voices speaking distorted English in my sister's empty room, and when I ran past her door, I saw a shadow. My sister texted me that she was not home, but I could still hear two people, a man and a woman, speaking in strange distorted English inside her bedroom, moving things around, on her desk and opening her closet. And when I finally gathered the courage to run past her room to reach my parents, I saw her door standing open, and what I swear was a shadow standing inside. That is the experience that changed me from someone who was not religious into someone who prays regularly. That turned a normal summer night into a memory so terrifying that even now, years later, my heart feels heavy and my throat feels like it is swelling shut whenever I talk about what happened. I heard voices in an empty room. I heard physical objects being moved by people who were not there. I saw evidence of something entering through the backyard, climbing over a fence using bricks as a stepping stool. And when I finally escaped to my parents' room and my sister came home to check, she said nothing looked out of place, and the door was not unlocked and the windows were secure. As if what I had experienced for at least 20 or 30 minutes had never happened at all. But it did happen. I know it happened. My body remembers the fear, even if the physical evidence disappeared before anyone else could see it. And I am telling this story now because I need to get it out. Because carrying it alone for all these years has been a weight I can barely manage. And because maybe someone reading this will have an explanation, or will have experienced something similar, and will understand what I went through that night. Let me start from the beginning, from the context that made that night possible. Because the details of where I was, and what I was doing, and why I was awake at midnight, all matter for understanding how the events unfolded. I was around 13 years old when this happened. It was summer break, that blessed stretch of time between school years, when you are free from homework and early mornings, and all the structure that normally governs your life. For a 13-year-old, summer break is a gift of unstructured time, of days that blend into each other, of the freedom to sleep late and stay up late and fill your hours however you choose. I had developed a habit that summer of staying up late into the night. Not because I was doing anything particularly exciting or rebellious, but because the nighttime was quiet. During the day, my family was always around, always making noise, always requiring attention or participation, or just being present in a way that made it hard to focus on anything solitary. I love my family. I need to be clear about that. But I also needed time to myself. And the late night hours were the only time I could reliably get that privacy and quiet. So I would stay up reading, enjoying my books in the silence, sometimes until 1 or 2 in the morning before finally going to sleep. My parents either did not know I was doing this, or chose not to make an issue of it since it was summer, and I did not have to wake up early the next day. The night when everything happened was probably around the middle of summer, late enough that I had fully settled into this routine, but early enough that there was still plenty of vacation left ahead. It was raining heavily outside. Not just a light drizzle or occasional showers, but serious rain. The kind that creates a constant drumming sound on the roof and windows, that drowns out most other ambient noise, that makes the world outside feel very far away, and makes indoor spaces feel even more enclosed and isolated. I loved the rain. I found it soothing, the white noise of it, the feeling of being inside and dry while nature was doing something dramatic just outside the walls. So I was enjoying my night, sitting in my room with a book, listening to the rain, completely content and relaxed. It was probably around midnight when I first heard the sound that interrupted my reading. The sound came from my sister's room, which was adjacent to mine. Our rooms shared a wall, which meant that sounds from her room would sometimes carry into mine if they were loud enough, though usually the wall provided enough soundproofing that I would only hear very obvious noises like music or talking. What I heard was the sound of a door being unlocked and opened. Not the main door to her bedroom from the hallway inside the house, but the door that led from her bedroom directly to the backyard. Some bedrooms in our house had these exterior doors, a design feature that gave private access to the outside without having to go through the main part of the house. The sound was distinctive, the click of a lock being turned, the creak of hinges, the slight change in the quality of sound as the door opened, and the barrier between inside and outside was removed. I knew that sound. I had heard it many times before when my sister used that door. But my sister was not home. At least, I did not think she was home. She had not told me she was coming back, and as far as I knew, she was staying at her boyfriend's place that night, something she did fairly regularly at that time. I put my book down and lifted my head, listening more carefully, trying to figure out what I had just heard. Maybe I had been wrong about the sound. Maybe it was something else. Some effect of the rain or the house settling, or some other explanation that did not involve a door opening in an empty room. And then I heard more sounds. Things being moved around on my sister's desk. My sister kept a lot of items on her desk: pens and pencils, school supplies, little gadgets and decorative objects. The accumulation of items that teenagers collect and display in their personal spaces. These items were now being moved around, knocked about, shifted from where they had been resting. I could hear this clearly through the wall. The small sounds of objects falling or sliding across the desk surface, the distinct noise of multiple items being disturbed, not all at once as if the desk had been bumped, but sequentially, as if someone was moving through the items one by one, or sweeping their hand across the surface. At this point I started questioning my own perceptions. Maybe this was in my head. Maybe the rain was creating sounds that I was misinterpreting as movement in my sister's room. Maybe I was tired and my brain was filling in details that were not actually there. I decided I needed to listen more carefully, more deliberately, to determine if what I was hearing was real or imagined. I sat up completely in my bed and put my ear directly against the wall that separated my room from my sister's room. And that is when I heard them. The voices. There were two distinct voices, one male, one female, both speaking what sounded like English, but distorted in a way I had never heard before and have never heard since. It was not a different language. It was not an accent. It was English words, or what seemed like English words but processed or filtered through something that made them sound wrong, alien, disturbed. I cannot adequately describe what distorted English sounds like, because I do not have a good comparison for it. It was like hearing someone speak underwater, or through a bad phone connection that was breaking up. Or like the way audio sounds when it has been heavily compressed and artifacts have been introduced into the sound. But worse than any of those comparisons, more unsettling, more fundamentally wrong. The content of what they were saying was incomprehensible to me. I could tell they were having a conversation, that the two voices were taking turns speaking, that there was some kind of communication happening, but I could not make out actual words or meaning. It was just this disturbing flow of distorted speech coming from a room that should have been empty. My first thought, the rational explanation my brain immediately jumped to, was that this must be my sister and her boyfriend. Maybe they had decided to come back to our house instead of staying at his place. Maybe they had entered through the backyard door to avoid waking anyone in the main part of the house. Maybe the distortion I was hearing was just an effect of listening through a wall. Or maybe they were speaking quietly, and that was affecting how I perceived their voices. This explanation made sense, and it made me feel better. It turned a potentially frightening situation into something mundane and normal. Of course, it was my sister and her boyfriend. Who else could it be? I decided to confirm this by sending my sister a message. I picked up my phone and texted her, asking if she was home. And then I waited for her response, still listening to the sounds coming from her room. The voices continuing their distorted conversation. Movement still happening among the objects on her desk. My phone buzzed with her reply. I looked at the screen. No, she was not home. My sister was not in that room. The voices I was hearing, the movement I was hearing, were not her and her boyfriend. They were something else, someone else, or possibly nothing that had any right to be classified as someone at all. In that moment, as the reality of my sister's response sank in, I heard a new sound from her room. The closet door opening. My sister's closet had a distinctive sound when it opened. The door would stick slightly in its frame, and then release with a particular creak and scrape. I had heard that sound countless times. And I was hearing it now, coming from a room where no one was supposed to be. And then I heard the clothes hangers moving. The metallic sound of hangers sliding along the closet rod. The rustling of fabric as clothing items were disturbed. The unmistakable audio signature of someone going through a closet, moving clothes around, searching for something or just examining what was there. I was still holding my phone, staring at my sister's message that confirmed she was not home, listening to sounds that indicated very clearly that someone or something was in her room, when my phone buzzed again with more messages from her. She was telling me to go to my parents' room. She must have realized from my question that something was wrong. Must have understood that I would not be asking if she was home, unless I had reason to think someone was in her room. And her immediate response was to get me to safety. She was right. I knew she was right. I needed to get out of my room and get to my parents who could protect me, or at least who could be witnesses to whatever was happening. Who could confirm I was not imagining everything. But there was a problem. A significant, terrifying problem that made following my sister's instruction much harder than it should have been. To get from my room to my parents' room, I had to go through the hallway. And to get to the hallway, I had to walk past my sister's room. My sister's bedroom door opened onto the same hallway that my door opened onto. The layout of the house meant there was no other route to my parents' room. No way to avoid passing directly by the door to the room where I had been hearing voices and movement for the past 20 or 30 minutes. And here is another important detail about my sister's habits. Whenever she left the house, she always closed her bedroom door. Always. This was her consistent practice, something she did without fail. A closed door meant she was not home. An open door meant she was in her room. I stood at my own bedroom door, hand on the handle, trying to gather the courage to open it and step out into the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to stay in my room, to barricade the door, to hide under my bed until morning. But I also knew that staying alone in my room, separated from my parents by a hallway and a door I was too afraid to open, was not actually safe. I needed to move. I needed to get to my parents. I needed to do what my sister had told me to do. I took a deep breath. And then I opened my door and ran. Not walked. Ran. Moved as fast as I could through that hallway toward my parents' room, trying to put as much speed and distance as possible between myself and whatever was in my sister's room. But even in my panic, even in my desperate sprint to safety, curiosity won out for just a fraction of a second. As I passed my sister's room, I turned my head to the right. Her door was open. My sister always closed her door when she left. Always. Without exception. But her door was standing open now, revealing the darkness of her room beyond. And in that darkness, I saw what I believe was a shadow. Not just the absence of light, but a shape. A form. Something darker than the surrounding darkness. Something that registered to my brain as a presence, rather than just empty space. I did not stop to examine it more closely. I did not pause to confirm what I was seeing. I just registered it in that split second of turning my head, and then I kept running, bursting into my parents' room, waking them up, probably incoherent with fear and adrenaline. I do not remember exactly what I told them. I was probably talking too fast, trying to explain everything at once. The sounds I had heard, the voices, the movement, the open door, the shadow. My parents, woken suddenly from sleep by their terrified 13-year-old child, probably did not immediately understand what I was trying to tell them. But they understood enough to know something had frightened me badly, and that I believed someone was in the house. At some point during or shortly after my arrival in my parents' room, my sister came home with her boyfriend. I do not know if my parents had called her, or if it was just coincidence of timing. If she had been planning to come home around that time anyway. But she arrived with her boyfriend, and together with my parents they went to investigate what I had reported. They checked the backyard first. And they found something that confirmed at least part of my story. That indicated someone or something had indeed been attempting to access the house from outside. The fence had a broken piece, and there were bricks positioned on either side of the fence, placed deliberately to create a stepping stool, a way for someone to climb over the fence more easily than they could have without that assistance. Someone had prepared a way to enter our backyard. Someone had broken the fence and set up a method to scale it. This was not random damage. This was intentional, purposeful, designed to facilitate entry. My sister and her boyfriend came back inside after examining the fence and the backyard. My parents were in the process of scolding me, blaming what had happened on my lack of religious faith, telling me that this was what occurred when you did not pray to God, when you did not maintain proper spiritual protection. I was not religious at the time. I had not grown up with a strong faith practice, had not spent much time thinking about God or prayer or spiritual matters. But in that moment, being lectured by my parents while still shaking with fear from what I had experienced, I made a mental note that maybe they were right. Maybe this had happened because I was spiritually unprotected. Maybe I needed to start taking religion more seriously. And that night did change me in that way. I became religious after that experience. Started praying regularly. Started taking spiritual protection seriously in a way I never had before. Whether that was rational or not, whether there was any actual causal relationship between my lack of prayer and the haunting I experienced, I cannot say. But the fear was powerful enough to convert me, to make me willing to try anything that might prevent something like that from happening again. My sister told my parents that when she checked her room, nothing looked out of place. The items on her desk were where they should have been. The closet door was closed. The clothes on the hangers were undisturbed. The door to the backyard was locked, as were the windows. Everything I had heard happening for 20 or 30 minutes, all the movement and disturbance and opening of doors, had apparently left no trace, or had been reversed, somehow, before anyone else could see the evidence. This is one of the aspects of the experience that I find most difficult to process or explain. I know what I heard. I know that objects were being moved around on that desk. I know that the closet door was opened and clothes were disturbed. I know that the backyard door was unlocked and opened. I heard all of these things clearly and distinctly through the wall. But when people checked, when witnesses other than me looked at the physical evidence, everything was normal. Undisturbed. Secured. Either I hallucinated 30 minutes of detailed, specific sounds that corresponded to real physical actions, but that never actually occurred. Or whatever was in that room had the ability to move things and then return them to their original positions. To open doors and then close and lock them again. to leave no evidence of its presence, despite being audible to me throughout the entire experience. I do not know which explanation is correct. I do not know if I am describing a haunting or a mental break, or something else entirely that does not fit neatly into any category I have words for. What I do know is that my sister's room always had something wrong with it. This was not the only strange occurrence in that space. Other things happened there over the time we lived in that house. Other unexplained events. Other moments when that room felt wrong or dangerous, or occupied by something that should not have been there. And I know that my body remembers the fear. That even now, years later, as I write this story and force myself to recall the details, my heart feels heavy in my chest. My throat feels like it is swelling shut. That feeling you get when you are about to cry, or when anxiety is constricting your breathing. The fear is still there, still accessible, still powerful enough to create physical symptoms just from thinking about what happened. I needed to get this story out. I have carried it for too long alone, have thought about it too many times without speaking about it, have questioned my own sanity and my own perceptions over and over, while never having anyone to discuss it with who might offer insight or understanding. So I am telling it now, putting it out into the world, asking if anyone knows what I might have heard that night. If anyone has an explanation for two voices speaking distorted English in an empty room, for the sounds of physical objects being moved by hands that left no trace, for a shadow in a doorway that should have been closed but was standing open. Was it a haunting? Were there spirits in my sister's room, perhaps of people who had died in that house before we moved in? Perhaps attached to the land itself rather than to the specific building? Was it an attempted break-in? Were the voices and sounds coming from actual living people who had climbed over our fence using the bricks as a stepping stool? Who had somehow opened the backyard door despite my sister later finding it locked? Who fled before they could be caught, and who I only heard but never actually saw? Was it something else entirely? Something that does not fit into categories like ghost or intruder? Something stranger and less definable that exists in spaces between our normal understanding of reality? I do not know. I have thought about these questions for years, and I am no closer to an answer than I was on the night it happened. What I know is that I heard two people speaking in distorted English in my sister's room while she was not home. I heard them moving things on her desk. I heard them opening her closet. I heard the backyard door being unlocked. I texted my sister to confirm she was not there, and she told me she was not. I ran past her room to get to my parents, and saw her door standing open, with what looked like a shadow inside. And when people checked, they found bricks positioned to help someone climb the fence. But they found no evidence of disturbance inside the room where I had been hearing activity for half an hour. That is my story. That is what happened to me when I was 13 years old on a rainy summer night. I am religious now. I pray regularly. I take spiritual protection seriously in a way I never did before that night. Because whatever I heard in my sister's room, whether it was ghosts or intruders or something I have no name for, it was real enough to change me permanently. To leave me with a fear response that activates even now when I talk about it. To make me understand that the world contains things I do not understand and cannot protect myself from using only rational, material means. If you know what I heard that night, if you have experienced something similar, if you have any explanation or insight or understanding to offer, please let me know. Because I still do not have answers. I only have the memory of those voices, that shadow, that open door, and the feeling that something very wrong was happening in the room next to mine, while I sat reading my book and listening to the rain. The rain was loud that night, but not loud enough to drown out the sound of two people speaking distorted English in an empty room, moving through my sister's belongings, opening doors that should have been locked. I heard them. I know I heard them. And I saw the shadow when I ran past her open door. That is the truth. That is what happened. And I will carry the weight of it, the fear of it, the questions about it, for the rest of my life. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for reading about my experience even though I cannot offer you a satisfying conclusion or explanation. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that do not have endings, that do not resolve, that leave you with more questions than answers. This is one of those stories. And it is real. And it happened to me. And I still do not know what I heard that night in my sister's room. But I know I heard something. And that something was real. And it was in our house. And it left no trace except the memory of fear that I carry with me still. Next one story start now. The alarm system announced pool door every night, but the pool had been buried after their daughter drowned there. The back door would swing open in the middle of the night, and the home alarm would announce in its automated voice, ding ding, pool door. But there was no pool anymore because the landlords had buried it after their young daughter drowned there years before we moved in, and my parents would find the door standing open even though no one in the house had moved from their beds. That is the nightmare I need you to understand before I tell you the rest of this story. Because everything that happened in that house in Grand Junction connects back to that buried pool, to that drowned child, to the grief-stricken parents who could not let go of the property where they had lost their daughter and who made it very clear to my parents that the house was extremely sentimental to them and they wanted nothing changed. We were living on top of a grave, essentially. The pool had not been removed or filled in properly. The concrete foundation was still there beneath the earth, and the outline of where it had been was still visible because the grass never grew right over that spot, creating a permanent scar in the backyard that marked where a little girl had died. And she never left. Or something never left. Something that opened doors and tapped on walls and moved shadows through hallways and watched us from the garage in the bedroom that looked out over the buried pool. Something that made 5 different members of my family, ranging in age from small children to adults, all experience the same sensations of being watched and the same unexplained phenomena without any of us knowing at first that the others were experiencing it too. I was a kid when my family moved into that house, young enough that my parents made the decision not to tell me and my sisters about the history of the property, about the daughter who had drowned, about the pool that had been buried rather than properly removed. They thought we were too young to handle that information, thought it would frighten us unnecessarily or make us uncomfortable in our new home. So they kept it to themselves and tried to act like everything was normal even as strange things started happening almost immediately after we moved in. The landlords had been very specific when they agreed to rent the house to my parents. This property meant a lot to them. It was extremely sentimental. They wanted nothing changed. They needed us to take care of it as if it were still their home. Because in many ways it still was their home. Still held their memories. Still contained whatever remained of their daughter's presence. My parents agreed to these terms without fully understanding what they were agreeing to, without knowing that taking care of the house would mean living with whatever had been left behind when the landlords moved out after their daughter's death. The house had a home alarm system, the kind that was becoming common in the late 1990s and early 2000s, that would announce whenever a door was opened. Not just a beep or a buzzing sound, but an actual automated voice that would identify which specific door had been opened. This was supposed to be a security feature, a way to know if someone was entering or leaving the house without having to check every door manually. The system would say things like, ding ding, garage door or ding ding, front door, giving you immediate information about which entrance had been accessed. The back door, which led from the house to the backyard where the pool used to be, was still labeled in the alarm system as pool door. The landlords had never changed it after burying the pool. Or perhaps they could not bring themselves to change it, to erase that last linguistic acknowledgement of the pool. where their daughter had spent her final moments. So when that door opened, the alarm would announce, "Ding ding, pool door." And it opened frequently. In the middle of the night, when everyone in the house was asleep. The first time it happened, my parents were jolted awake by the automated voice echoing through the quiet house. "Ding ding, pool door." They assumed one of us kids had gotten up, maybe sleepwalking, maybe going outside for some reason that would make sense once they checked. But our bedrooms were all close together in the house, clustered in one area, and the layout was such that you could hear when someone got up and moved around. Footsteps in the hallway, the bathroom door opening and closing, the kitchen floor creaking under weight. The sounds of a house occupied by people who are awake and moving. But there had been no sounds before the alarm announced the pool door opening. No footsteps, no movement, just silence, and then the alarm. And then my parents getting up to investigate. They found the back door open, not just unlocked, but actually open, swinging on its hinges. The night air coming into the house. My parents checked on all of us kids. We were all asleep in our beds. No one had gotten up. No one had gone to the back door. No one had any explanation for how that door had opened. They closed and locked it, probably checked it multiple times to make sure it was secure, and went back to bed telling themselves it must have been a malfunction of the lock, or the door had not been closed properly, or there was some rational explanation they were missing. But it happened again. And again. Multiple times over the weeks and months we lived in that house. Always late at night. Always when everyone was asleep. The alarm would suddenly announce, "Ding ding, pool door." And my parents would get up and find the back door standing open. The same thing happened with the garage door. The alarm would announce it, my parents would investigate, and the door would be open, even though no one in the house had moved. These were not doors that could easily swing open on their own. They had latches and locks. They required deliberate force to open. Something or someone was opening them. But it was never any of us. My parents never told us kids about this at the time. They handled it quietly, probably not wanting to frighten us, probably hoping it would stop, or that they would figure out what was causing it. But the frequency of the doors opening, the consistency of it happening late at night, must have been deeply unsettling for them, even if they did not fully acknowledge to each other what they were afraid it might mean. I had my own experiences in that house that I did not connect to anything supernatural at the time, because I was too young to have that framework for understanding what I was feeling. The garage terrified me. Specifically, taking the trash out to the garage, which was a chore my mom would ask me to do regularly, like most parents ask their kids to do. The moment I stepped into the garage, I would get an overwhelming feeling of being watched. Not the vague sense of unease that you might feel in any dark space, but a specific, intense sensation of a presence. Something in the shadows. Something paying very close attention to me. Something that did not want me there. It was not my imagination running wild, or a child's fear of the dark. I was not afraid of dark spaces in general. I was specifically afraid of that garage. And specifically because of the feeling of being watched that hit me every single time I entered that space. I would take the trash out as quickly as possible, practically running, desperate to get back inside the main house where the feeling would dissipate. But even moving quickly, even knowing I would only be in there for a few seconds, the dread I felt every time my mom asked me to take out the trash was significant enough that I remember it clearly decades later. I did not tell anyone about this feeling at the time. I thought it was just me being scared for no good reason. I thought I would be mocked or told to stop being silly. So I endured it silently, completing the chore because I was supposed to, but hating every second of it. My sisters shared a bedroom in the house. We never confirmed it at the time, But we realized years later that their room was most likely the same room the landlord's daughter had used when the family lived there. It made sense logically based on the size and location of the room, and based on what happened in that space while my sisters occupied it. They would hear tapping on the wall at night, not random house sounds, not the rhythmic clanking of pipes or the settling of wood as temperatures changed. Deliberate tapping. Irregular but purposeful, like someone on the other side of the wall trying to communicate or trying to get their attention. The sound did not have the qualities you would associate with plumbing or heating systems. It was too inconsistent for that, too specifically localized to one area of the wall. And it only happened at night, which is not typical of mechanical or structural sounds that usually occur throughout the day, as the house goes through temperature changes. My sisters mentioned the tapping to my parents, probably casually at first, just noting that there was a weird sound in their room sometimes. But one night it escalated to the point where they could not ignore it or dismiss it as something normal. They started screaming for my parents. Screaming loud enough and urgently enough that I woke up in my own room and could hear them yelling over and over, "Someone is knocking. Someone is knocking." The terror in their voices was real. This was not the sound of kids playing games or trying to get attention. This was genuine fear, the kind that makes you scream for your parents, because you need help, and you need it immediately. My parents rushed to their room. I got up and followed, drawn by the commotion and the screaming. Arriving just as my parents were trying to calm my sisters down and figure out what had happened. And we could hear it too, the tapping. Once we were all quiet and listening, we could all hear the sound my sisters had been describing. It was coming from the wall, clear and distinct, impossible to mistake for anything else. My dad told us it was the heater, or the pipes, some normal house sound that we were misinterpreting because it was nighttime, and we were already scared. And because we were kids, because we wanted to believe that our dad knew what he was talking about, and that everything was fine, we accepted his explanation. But years later, when we were adults and discussing whether we believed in ghosts or paranormal activity, my dad admitted the truth. He had only said it was the heater or pipes because we were young and he did not want to frighten us more than we already were. He never had an actual explanation for the sound. He did not know what was causing the tapping. He just knew that saying "I don't know" or "that's not normal" would have made the situation worse for a group of already terrified children. So he lied to protect us. Gave us a false explanation that we could hold on to, that would let us go back to sleep, that would prevent us from lying awake in fear every night, waiting for the tapping to start again. Cabinets and drawers would open on their own in that house. Not constantly, not in a way that would force us to acknowledge it as something actively wrong, but frequently enough that it became part of the background of living there. You would walk into the kitchen, and a cabinet would be open that you were certain had been closed. A drawer in a bedroom would be pulled out slightly, even though no one had been in that room recently. It was unsettling, but we never had a real explanation for it, so we just accepted it. The way you accept any quirk of a house you live in. Doors that stick, windows that leak, cabinets that apparently open themselves sometimes. Eventually, my older brother came to live with us. He was significantly older than me and my sisters, 10 or 11 years older, which meant he was essentially a young adult while we were still children. He moved into the room that was farthest from the rest of the bedrooms, on the opposite side of the house near the living room, in a space that had primarily been used as an office before he arrived. My parents did not tell him about the history of the house any more than they had told us. They did not mention the drowned daughter, the buried pool, any of the strange things that had been happening. They either thought he would not experience anything, or thought he would dismiss it if he did. Or maybe they just did not know how to have that conversation. His room had large windows that looked directly out into the backyard. which meant they looked directly at the area where the pool used to be, at the spot where you could still see the outline in the grass, at the place where a child had died. My brother had only been living with us for a few weeks when he had his first significant experience. It was a weekend night. The rest of the family was in the living room watching television together, a normal family activity that we did regularly. My brother was in his room, probably doing homework or reading or just wanting some time alone. Suddenly he came out of his room fast, moving quickly, his face pale, his whole demeanor shaken in a way that was immediately obvious to everyone. He was genuinely terrified, and my brother was not someone who scared easily, or who would make up stories for attention. He said, "Mom, there's someone in the backyard." My dad immediately went outside to check. Went to the backyard, looked around the perimeter of the property, checked the gate, looked for any sign of an intruder or an animal or anything that would explain what my brother had seen. There was nothing there. The backyard was empty. No person, no animal, nothing that would account for my brother's reaction. But my brother was adamant about what he had seen, or at least what he had felt. He said he always felt watched in that room. The same feeling I had experienced in the garage. The sensation of a presence, of being observed, of something paying very close attention to you from a location you cannot pinpoint. Your body tingles. Your stomach drops. The hairs stand up on your arms and the back of your neck. These are not conscious responses you choose to have. They are your nervous system reacting to a threat it perceives, even if your conscious mind cannot identify what the threat is. My brother felt this constantly in the room that looked out over the buried pool. And on that particular night it had escalated to the point where he was certain someone was in the backyard, watching him through the windows, close enough and real enough that he needed to alert the family. But there was no one there. Or at least no one visible. No one physical. No one my dad could find or confront. My mom had been experiencing her own phenomena throughout our time in that house. Things she had not discussed with us kids, probably trying to protect us the same way my dad had protected us by lying about the tapping in my sister's room. She had seen a shadow move down the hallway one night while everyone else was asleep. Seen it with enough clarity to assume it was one of us kids sneaking around. Getting out of bed for some reason, maybe going to the kitchen or the bathroom. She got up to confront whoever it was, to send them back to bed, to find out what they needed. She watched the shadow go into my room. My door was open, so she had a clear line of sight to see the shadow enter my space. Certain she had caught someone, certain she was about to find one of my sisters or my brother in my room where they should not have been, she walked in and turned on the light. I was asleep. Deeply, genuinely asleep in a way that a mother knows cannot be faked by a child who was just moving around a second ago. She could tell immediately that I had not been the shadow she saw, that I had been asleep for some time, that whatever had moved down the hallway and into my room was not me. She checked my closet, under my bed, around the room, looking for whoever or whatever had entered, convinced that she must have missed something, that there must be an explanation. Nothing. The room was empty except for me sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that my mother had just seen something move into my space and then vanish. She went to my sister's room next, thinking maybe one of them had somehow slipped past her, had been the shadow she saw. Their door was closed, which she noticed because it had not been closed when the shadow was moving. And when she opened it and checked, both of my sisters were asleep in their beds. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone was asleep. No one had been in the hallway. No one had gone into my room. But she had seen something move, had watched it with enough clarity to identify its direction and destination, had followed it immediately, and found nothing. After my brother's experience claiming someone was in the backyard, After months of doors opening and tapping sounds and shadows and feelings of being watched, my mom decided she needed to contact the landlords. She called them and told them everything that had been happening. The alarm going off, the doors opening, the sounds, the shadow, the sensations of being watched that multiple family members were experiencing in different parts of the house. She asked directly, had they experienced anything while living there themselves? The landlords did not answer that question, or at least, they did not give a straight answer. They did not deny my mom's experiences, or tell her she was imagining things, or offer normal explanations for what was happening. Instead, not long after that conversation, they told my parents they had decided not to renew our lease. They said they were moving back into the house themselves and asked if we would be willing to move out early, before the lease was technically up. They did not argue when my mom had described the paranormal activity. Did not seem surprised. Were quiet and distant in their communication, giving the impression of people who knew exactly what we were talking about because they had experienced it themselves, but who were not willing to discuss it openly. My parents always believed, always assumed based on how the landlords behaved, that losing their daughter had changed them deeply. That the grief had been so profound that they could never truly leave the house where she had died. Could never fully let go of the property that held her memory. And perhaps they could never let go because she had never fully left. Because some part of her, or some echo of what happened to her, remained attached to that space, and to the pool that was buried but not gone. We moved out shortly after the landlords requested early termination of the lease. My parents were probably relieved to have an excuse to leave. To get all of us out of a house where too many strange things were happening. Where too many people were feeling watched and experiencing phenomena that had no rational explanation. Years passed. We grew up. Me and my sisters became teenagers, and then adults. We moved away from Grand Junction, established our own lives, created distance between ourselves and that house where we had spent a portion of our childhood. And then one day, when we were all together as adults, we started having a conversation about whether we believed in ghosts or paranormal activity. The kind of debate families have sometimes, where people take different positions and argue their points and share stories or evidence. That was when my parents finally told us the full history. About the landlord's daughter who had drowned in the pool. About the pool being buried rather than removed. About the landlord's insistence that the house was sentimental and nothing should be changed. And then we all started sharing our own experiences from that house. The things we had each noticed or felt, or witnessed but had never discussed with each other at the time. I talked about the garage and the overwhelming feeling of being watched every time I took out the trash. My sisters talked about the tapping on the wall that had terrified them so badly they screamed for my parents. My brother talked about feeling watched in the room that looked out over the buried pool and seeing someone in the backyard. My mom talked about the shadow she had seen move down the hallway and into my room. My dad admitted he had never believed his own explanations about the heater and pipes. Had known all along that something strange was happening, but had not known what to do about it, or how to protect us from it. And what made it worse, what made it truly undeniable, was that our stories matched. Details we had never shared with each other at the time because we had all been keeping our experiences private. Feelings and moments and specific incidents that aligned perfectly across multiple witnesses who had been different ages and had different levels of understanding about what was happening. The pool door opening at night. Multiple people feeling intensely watched in different parts of the house. Shadows moving. Sounds with no source. Objects being moved. A presence that was undeniable once you paid attention to it, but that could be ignored or explained away if you tried hard enough. We had all experienced the same haunting without realizing we were all going through it together. And learning that, comparing notes years later, confirmed what we had probably all suspected individually, but had been afraid to say out loud. That house was haunted, whether by the spirit of the drowned girl or by something else that had been attracted to the tragedy and grief that had occurred there. Something was present in that space that affected everyone who lived there. Even now, more than 2 decades after we moved out, telling this story gives me chills. Writing it out, organizing the memories, describing what happened in that house, brings back the same familiar feeling I had in the garage. That sensation of being watched. That knowledge that you are not alone in a space that appears empty. The house felt like it was never truly empty. Even when we were all out, even when no one was supposed to be there, it felt occupied, inhabited by something that had prior claim to the space, and that tolerated our presence, but never welcomed it. I think about that buried pool sometimes, about the concrete foundation still there under the earth, under the grass that never grew quite right, about the little girl who drowned there, and the parents who could not bring themselves to remove the pool entirely, could not erase the last physical reminder of where their daughter had died. I think about the alarm system still labeling that door as pool door even though the pool was gone. About the door that opened in the middle of the night, again and again, as if someone was still going out to the pool, still trying to access something that no longer existed on the surface, but that remained underneath. I think about my brother's room, with the windows looking out at that spot in the backyard. About him feeling watched constantly. About him seeing someone out there one night, even though there was no one to see. I think about my sisters in the room that was probably the daughter's room. Hearing tapping on the wall. Hearing what might have been a little girl trying to communicate in the only way available to her. I think about the shadow my mom saw moving through the house. Small enough to be a child. Purposeful enough to have a destination. Real enough that my mom followed it, expecting to find one of her own children and instead finding nothing. And I think about the landlords who moved back into that house after we left, who chose to return to a space where their daughter had died, where they had presumably experienced the same paranormal activity we had experienced, where they knew they would be living with whatever remained of their loss. Did they want to be close to her? Did they feel like the hauntings were a form of connection? A way to maintain contact with a daughter they had lost too soon? Did they find comfort in the presence we had found disturbing? Or were they trapped by their grief, unable to move forward? Unable to leave a house that held them in place through both memory and active haunting? I do not know. We never spoke to them again after moving out. Never learned what they experienced when they moved back in. Never found out if the activity continued, or intensified, or somehow resolved. All I know is what my family experienced during the time we lived there. The doors that opened themselves. The tapping that had no source. The shadows that moved when no one was there. The overwhelming sensation of being watched that multiple people felt in different locations. The pool door opening in the middle of the night while everyone slept. The grass that never grew right over the buried pool. The house that felt occupied even when it was empty. That is my story. That is what happened to my family in Grand Junction, in the house where a little girl had drowned, and where her parents had buried the pool, but could not bury the memories or the presence that remained. We survived it. We moved out. We went on with our lives. But we never forgot. And we never found an explanation that satisfied us, that accounted for everything we experienced, that made sense of why a buried pool would create such a persistent haunting. The alarm said ding ding. Pool door in the middle of the night. And the door would be open. And no one in the house had moved. That is what we lived with. That is what we remember. That is the truth of what happened in that house. And I am telling it now because it has been long enough. Because we are all old enough to discuss it openly. Because the fear has faded enough that I can write about it without needing to sleep with the lights on afterward. But the chills remain. The memory of that feeling in the garage remains. The knowledge that we shared our home with something that should not have been there remains. The pool was buried. But what drowned there never left. And we learned that the hard way, living in a house where the alarm announced pool door every night, and where the grass never grew right over the spot where a little girl had died. That is my story. That is the truth. That is what happened when my family lived in a haunted house in Grand Junction. We moved out. The landlords moved back in. And the pool door probably still opens in the middle of the night, announcing itself to whoever is unlucky enough to be sleeping there when it happens. Ding ding, pool door. Every night. No one moving. The door standing open. That is the legacy of the buried pool. That is what happens when you bury a tragedy instead of properly laying it to rest. The concrete foundation remains. The outline in the grass remains. The presence remains. And somewhere in Grand Junction, that house still stands, still occupied, still haunted by what was buried, but never truly gone. Next one story start now. The hotel security cameras showed me running to my door, over and over, but they never showed anyone ringing the bell. The IT department at the hotel called me back after reviewing the security footage and told me they could see me sprinting to my door and flinging it open multiple times across. Several nights, looking desperately into the empty hallway. But the cameras never once showed another person near my room or anyone pressing my doorbell. That is the moment when I understood that whatever had been happening to me since joining the military in 2022 was not something I could explain away as pranks or coincidence or simple sleep paralysis, because now there was video evidence of my reactions to events that apparently were not occurring in physical reality. And if the cameras could not capture whatever was ringing my doorbell in the middle of the night, then what I was dealing with was something that existed outside the normal rules of how the world is supposed to work. Something was following me from location to location, from Mississippi to Virginia to Romania to wherever the military sent me, appearing in my sleep paralysis, standing beside my bed, lunging at me in dreams that layered on top of each other until I could not tell what was real, opening doors that should have been locked, ringing doorbells that security cameras insisted no one was touching. And now my neighbors had seen something so disturbing coming from my house that they moved out within days of witnessing it. I know most stories on Reddit are fake. I think that same thing when I read them. Have that same immediate skepticism that comes from spending time on the internet where people make up elaborate tales for attention or entertainment, or whatever satisfaction they get from fooling strangers. But this story is not fake. This is real. This is happening to me. And I wish more than anything that it was just another made-up internet story, instead of the nightmare that has taken over my life since I joined the military and started experiencing things that have no rational explanation. Before 2022, before I enlisted, I had never experienced sleep paralysis. Not once in my entire life up to that point. No night terrors, no episodes of waking up unable to move, no shadow people standing in corners of my bedroom. None of the phenomena that some people experience regularly and learn to manage as an unfortunate, but ultimately harmless quirk of how their brain transitions between sleep states. I slept normally. I had normal dreams and normal nightmares occasionally, and normal periods of insomnia when I was stressed. But nothing that fell into the category of sleep disorders or paranormal experiences. The first time it happened was in A school in Gulfport, Mississippi. Builder school, which is where the Navy trains construction specialists, teaching them the skills they will need for their jobs in the military. It was just a random weeknight, nothing special or significant about the date. No particular stress beyond the normal pressure of military training and adjusting to a completely new life. My roommate and I went to sleep around 10 at night. He had been playing video games before bed. I had been studying, both of us following our normal routines to decompress from the day before, trying to get the sleep we needed to function the next morning. I knocked out, fell asleep without difficulty, tired from the physical and mental demands of training. Sometime in the middle of the night I woke up facing the wall. Immediately, before I was even fully conscious, I knew something was wrong because I could not move. My entire body was locked in place, frozen in whatever position I had been sleeping in, completely unresponsive to my attempts to shift or roll over or even move my fingers. I was awake and aware, but trapped inside a body that would not obey my commands. I could hear my roommate snoring on the other side of the room. The sound was clear and distinct, coming from his bed near the window while mine was positioned near the sink and bathroom. Our desks were pushed together in the middle of the room to form a divider between our sleeping areas, giving us each a small amount of privacy in the shared space. Which meant I could not see him from where I was lying, but I could hear him clearly, and I knew exactly where he was. And I knew with absolute certainty that he was not the one in my room with me. I felt eyes on me. Not imagined, not a vague sense of unease that you might dismiss as anxiety or an overactive imagination. Eyes. A specific, undeniable sensation of being watched, of someone's gaze focused directly on me with an intensity that was almost physical. My whole body went cold, that particular kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with fear. The cold you feel when you have been caught doing something wrong or when you realize you are in danger. A heavy, paralyzing dread settled over me beyond the physical paralysis I was already experiencing. This was psychological, emotional. A weight pressing down on my chest and my mind, telling me that something was very wrong and I was completely helpless to do anything about it. I felt like someone was standing on the other side of my bed, just out of my line of sight, watching me. Not moving, not making noise, just standing there and staring at my back as I lay frozen facing the wall. I was so afraid that I stopped breathing. This was a conscious choice. A decision I made based on the terrified logic that if this was a real person who had somehow entered our room, maybe I could play dead. Maybe I could convince them I was still asleep. Maybe they would leave if they thought I was not aware of their presence. But holding my breath had an unintended consequence. The need for oxygen forced my body to jerk itself out of the paralysis for a split second, just long enough for me to confirm that I could not move voluntarily, that the paralysis was real and not something I was imagining, and that the fear I felt was justified by how completely vulnerable I was. In this state, the logical part of my brain tried to rationalize what was happening. We were in military barracks. Sailors assigned to watch over students had key cards that gave them access to our rooms for inspections or emergencies. We shared a bathroom with the room next door, which meant there was a connecting door that someone could potentially enter through. It would not be impossible for another person to be standing in my room for some official reason I was not aware of. So I prepared myself mentally for a potential attack. If this person tried to hurt me, I would fight back as soon as I could move. I would defend myself with everything I had. But until I could move, I had to stay still, had to wait, had to endure the terror of being watched by something I could not see. I stayed frozen like that for so long, keeping my breathing shallow and quiet, trying to detect any movement or sound that would tell me what the presence was doing, that eventually exhaustion overwhelmed the fear and I fell back asleep. When I woke up in the morning, everything was normal. My roommate was getting ready for the day. The room was empty except for us. Whatever I had felt in the night was gone. I did not tell anyone about the experience. I convinced myself it had been a dream or a one-time incident. Something strange, but not significant, not worth discussing or worrying about. I filed it away and tried to forget about it. I did not experience sleep paralysis again for months. Then in late 2022, after I was stationed in Virginia, it happened again. Different barracks, older base, first floor, different room. This time I had a room to myself. No roommate to provide the illusion of safety or the possibility that what I was sensing was actually another living person. The feeling was the same. The presence was the same. I woke up facing the wall again, unable to move, with the undeniable sensation that something was standing, just out of sight on the other side of my bed, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The next morning I mentioned the experience casually to some coworkers. I was not looking for help or validation, just making conversation, mentioning in passing that I had experienced sleep paralysis and it had been unsettling. One of the older sailors overheard the conversation. He used to live in those barracks, had occupied one of those rooms before moving to different housing. He pulled me aside, away from the group, and told me he had felt the same thing there, had experienced the same presence, the same sensation of being watched during sleep paralysis. And then he told me something that seemed absurd at the time but that I have thought about constantly since. He told me to put a salt circle around my bed and pray. I would have assumed he was messing with me, playing a prank on the new person, except that he was not even part of the original conversation. He had just overheard me talking, and felt compelled to pull me aside and warn me. And he looked genuinely unsettled when he said it, like he was remembering something he had tried to forget, like he was taking seriously something that most people would laugh off as superstition. I did not put salt around my bed. I did not pray. I told myself it was just stress, just the adjustment to military life, just a coincidence that I had experienced sleep paralysis in 2 different locations. I tried to forget about it and focus on my work and my training and building my career. In 2023, we deployed to Romania. This was the worst episode I had experienced up to that point. The one that made it impossible to keep dismissing what was happening as random sleep issues or stress-related phenomena. 4 of us got put in a separate hotel because we had booked the deployment last minute, and the main accommodations were full. I went to sleep at a normal time. We had work the next day and I needed to be rested and functional. I fell asleep without difficulty. I woke up and was immediately paralyzed. The transition from sleep to paralysis was instant, no gradual awareness or chance to orient myself. Just sudden waking and complete inability to move. I held my breath like I had learned to do, using the body's oxygen deprivation response to force myself to break free from the paralysis enough to move slightly, enough to look around and assess what was happening. I looked up toward the rest of the room. There was something there, standing right next to my bed. It is hard to describe because it was not a detailed figure with features and clothing and a clear form. It was more like an outline, a darker shape inside the darkness of the room, a shadow that was somehow darker than the surrounding shadows. A presence that my eyes could detect even though there was nothing solid to see. The second I focused on it, the second my eyes registered its location, and my brain acknowledged that yes, something was there, it lunged at me. And then I woke up, still in bed, still paralyzed. The episode had not ended. I had not actually woken up. I had just transitioned from one layer of the experience to another layer that felt like waking, but was not. I held my breath again, forcing myself to break the paralysis, forcing my eyes to open so I could see what was happening. The shape was still there, standing next to my bed. And it lunged again. I woke up again. Same bed, same paralysis, same inability to move or escape, or do anything except experience the cycle repeating. This happened over and over. Lunge, wake, lunge, wake. Each iteration feeling completely real. each time convinced that I had finally woken up for real, only to have the presence lunge at me again and send me into another layer of false waking. I could feel my real body trapped underneath all these layers of dreaming and paralysis. Could feel my real eyes squeezed shut. Could feel my chest burning because I was intentionally restricting my breathing to try to force the episodes to end. Could sense that somewhere beneath all the dreams within dreams, my actual physical body was lying in that hotel bed going through something my conscious mind could not fully access. Every time I almost forced my eyes open, every time I got close to actually breaking through to real waking consciousness, the thing would lunge again and send me back down into another cycle. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably much less time, I managed to pry my eyes open for real. The real room with the real darkness and the real silence of a hotel in the middle of the night. Empty. No figure standing beside my bed. No presence that my physical eyes could detect. But I was too terrified to go back to sleep. I grabbed my phone and called my girlfriend, who was in a different time zone, who was awake and available to talk. I stayed on FaceTime with her until about 3 in the morning my time, just talking about nothing, keeping my mind occupied, keeping myself connected to something real and normal and safe. Eventually, I passed out from sheer exhaustion, my body overriding my fear and shutting down, because it could not function anymore without rest. At 6:15 in the morning, my coworker was shaking me awake. We were supposed to be downstairs at 6:00 for formation or a meeting or whatever the scheduled activity was for that morning. I had slept through my alarm, through whatever noise the rest of the team had made getting ready, through everything. I rushed to get dressed and ready, apologizing for oversleeping, trying to pull myself together after the night I had just experienced. As I was getting ready, I asked my coworker if she had asked the hotel staff to open my door to wake me up, thinking maybe that explained why she had been able to get into my room. She looked at me strangely and said my door was already open when she got to my floor. Wide open, standing open to the hallway, like it had been that way all night. I tried to rationalize this. Maybe I had left it open in my sleep. Maybe I had sleepwalked. Maybe in my exhausted state I had gotten up to use the bathroom or get water and had not closed the door properly. Maybe I was losing my grip on reality and doing things I had no memory of. But I did not believe those explanations even as I offered them to myself, because I knew I had closed and locked that door before going to sleep. I knew my habits and my routines, and I knew that securing my door before bed was automatic, not something I would forget or skip. Someone or something had opened that door while I was trapped in those cycles of paralysis and false waking. And it had stood open all night with me unconscious and vulnerable inside. The next major incident was in early 2025, overseas again, different hotel, different deployment. I woke up at 2:00 in the morning to the sound of my doorbell. Loud, clear, unmistakable. The kind of sound that jolts you from deep sleep to full alertness immediately. I assumed it was a prank. Assumed one of my coworkers was messing with me. Had decided it would be funny to wake me up in the middle of the night by ringing my doorbell and then running away before I could catch them. I waited for a bit, letting whoever it was get back to their room, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing me react immediately. Then I got up and checked the hallway. Opened my door and looked in both directions. No one there. Empty hallway. Silence. I went back to bed, annoyed but not particularly concerned. Just a prank. Just someone being immature. Nothing to worry about. But it started happening regularly. Not every night, but often enough that I became paranoid about it. Often enough that I started sleeping badly because I was listening for the doorbell, anticipating the next time it would ring and jolt me awake. One night when it rang, I sprinted to the door. Did not wait. Did not give whoever was out there time to get away. Just launched myself out of bed and across the room, and flung the door open as fast as I possibly could. Empty hallway. No one visible. No sound of footsteps running away or doors closing, or any indication that someone had been there seconds ago. There was a coworker I was not particularly close with whose room was down the hall from mine. I started to suspect he was the one doing it, that he was playing an elaborate prank, ringing my bell and then sprinting back to his room fast enough to avoid being seen. I confronted him. Asked him directly if he was ringing my doorbell in the middle of the night. Told him I knew it was him and he needed to stop. He looked genuinely confused. Told me I sounded crazy. Said he had no idea what I was talking about and had not been ringing anyone's doorbell. His reaction seemed authentic, not the response of someone who had been caught and was trying to cover it up, but the response of someone who honestly had no clue what I was accusing him of. I did not believe him. Or rather, I did not want to believe him, because if he was not the one ringing my doorbell, then I had to find another explanation, and I did not have one that made sense. I went to the front desk of the hotel and asked them to check the security cameras. Explained that someone had been harassing me by ringing my doorbell in the middle of the night, and I needed to know who it was, so I could report them appropriately. The hotel staff said they would review the footage and get back to me. I assumed this would resolve the mystery, would give me video evidence of whoever was pranking me so I could take appropriate action. Later that day, they called me back. It had reviewed everything, had looked at multiple nights of footage from the camera that covered my hallway. They told me they could see me on the recordings, could see me running to my door multiple times across several nights, could see me opening it and looking out into the hallway with an expression of confusion or frustration or fear, depending on the night. But they never saw anyone else. Never saw anyone in the hallway near my door. Never saw anyone approaching my room or pressing my doorbell, or doing anything that would explain why I kept running to the door and flinging it open. The cameras showed me reacting to something, but they did not show the thing I was reacting to. This is the point where I should have sought help. Should have told someone in my chain of command that I was experiencing something I could not explain. That I needed medical evaluation or psychological support, or something beyond just trying to handle this on my own. But I did not, because admitting that I was experiencing unexplained phenomena, admitting that I was hearing doorbells that security cameras could not verify, admitting that I had sleep paralysis episodes where shadowy figures lunged at me, sounded like admitting I was having a mental health crisis. And in the military, mental health issues can affect your career, can result in being removed from your position, or being discharged, or being labeled as someone who cannot handle stress. So I kept quiet, told myself it was just stress and anxiety and sleep issues. Told myself I would be fine once I got more rest, or once the deployment ended, or once I adjusted to whatever new situation I was in. By 2026, I had mostly convinced myself this was the right interpretation, that I was dealing with stress-related sleep disturbances that would resolve once my circumstances improved. I made rank, which meant I could move out of the barracks and live in town in my own place, away from the close quarters and constant presence of other people that might be contributing to my stress. Living alone in my own place was supposed to help, was supposed to give me the space and privacy and control over my environment that would let me sleep peacefully and stop experiencing these episodes. Things were quiet for a while. No sleep paralysis. No shadowy figures. No doorbells ringing in the middle of the night. I started to think I had been right, that it had been stress, that moving to my own place had resolved whatever psychological issues had been causing the phenomena. Until this week. I woke up to the sound of something running up my stairs. Not a dream. Not a muffled sound that I might have been misinterpreting. Actual footsteps on the stairs inside my house. Heavy, fast, deliberate. The sound of someone or something moving quickly up the staircase toward the second floor where my bedroom was located. Then my bedroom door opened. I heard it clearly, the sound of the doorknob turning and the hinges creaking as the door swung inward. I could not move. Paralyzed again, lying in my bed, aware and awake but completely unable to respond physically to what was happening. Something ran to the edge of my bed. I could hear it. Could hear the footsteps crossing my bedroom floor and stopping right beside where I was lying. Could hear breathing. Heavy breathing. Like something or someone standing there, out of breath from running up the stairs, standing right next to me, and breathing loudly enough for me to hear it clearly. I pretended to be asleep, kept my eyes closed, kept my breathing regular, tried to give no indication that I was aware of what was happening. I was too afraid to move, too afraid to open my eyes and see what was standing there, too afraid to do anything except lie there and hope that it would leave if it thought I was asleep. After a few seconds that felt like hours, it walked away. I heard the footsteps moving back across my bedroom floor. Heard my door open again. Heard it leave. Heard the door close behind it. My body finally unlocked. The paralysis released and I could move again. I sat up in bed shaking, ice cold despite the temperature of the room, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did not get up to check the house. Did not go downstairs to see if anyone had broken in, or if my doors were open, or if there was any physical evidence of what I had just experienced. I just sat there in my bed until morning, too afraid to move, too afraid to investigate, too afraid to do anything except wait for daylight. The next day I was doing dishes in my kitchen, trying to pretend everything was normal, trying to go about my regular routines as if nothing had happened. I noticed my neighbors through the window. The couple who lived across the way from me in the neighboring building or house. They were arguing. The woman kept gesturing toward my place, her body language agitated and distressed, pointing repeatedly at my house, while talking rapidly to the man she was with. The guy was pacing, looking pale, running his hands through his hair, or putting his hands on his head in that gesture people make when they are upset or stressed or trying to process something disturbing. For a second I wondered if she had caught him sneaking into my place. If maybe my neighbor had been the one I heard running up my stairs. If this was all going to have some mundane explanation, like a neighbor who had been entering my house for some reason and had now been caught by his partner. But then I realized that narrative did not make sense. I never heard my front door open. I have a Ring doorbell and camera system that sends me notifications whenever there is movement near my door or whenever the door opens. I would have gotten alerts on my phone if someone had entered through the front door. The back door has a loud, distinctive creak. If someone had entered that way, I would have heard it clearly, would have been alerted to an intruder before they got halfway up my stairs. There was no way for someone to have entered my house without me hearing it or being notified about it. And yet I had heard footsteps running up my stairs as clearly as I have ever heard anything. My neighbors noticed me watching them through my kitchen window. The argument seemed to get louder, more intense. The woman started yelling that they needed to tell someone, that they needed to call the police, her voice carrying across the distance between our homes. They had seen something. Something coming from my house, or related to my house. Something that disturbed them deeply enough that they were having a serious argument about whether to report it to authorities. A couple of days later I noticed they were moving out, packing their belongings, loading a truck, leaving the property. They did not stop by to say goodbye or to tell me what they had seen. They just left as quickly as they could organize their departure. I saw the base corpsmen, told them I was having trouble sleeping, having anxiety, did not explain the full scope of what was happening, because I did not know how to explain it without sounding like I was having a psychotic break. They prescribed anxiety medication to help me sleep. It has been quiet for a few days. Nothing new has happened since I started the medication. No footsteps, no breathing, no figures in my room. I am sleeping better, or at least sleeping more deeply, sedated enough that I am not experiencing the paralysis or the awareness of presences. But my military contract ends soon. I am going home, back to civilian life, back to my family, back to the place I came from before I joined up and started experiencing all of this. And I am genuinely afraid that whatever has been following me, whatever has been appearing in my sleep paralysis and ringing my doorbell and running up my stairs, is going to follow me home. That it is not attached to military bases or barracks or deployment hotels, but is attached to me specifically. That going home will not end this, but will just bring this presence into my family's life. Into my childhood home, into spaces that should be safe and familiar. If you have had experiences like this, I need to know. I do not know if what I am experiencing is normal sleep paralysis that has been exacerbated by military stress, or if this is something else. Something that started when I joined the military, and that has been escalating ever since. I do not know if the fact that an older sailor told me to put salt around my bed means that this is a known phenomenon in military barracks. That there is something about these spaces that attracts or creates these experiences. I do not know if the hotel security cameras failing to show anyone near my door means I am hallucinating, or means the thing ringing my doorbell exists outside normal physical reality. I do not know what my neighbors saw that made them move out within days. I do not know why my door was standing open all night in Romania after I experienced those layered cycles of paralysis and lunging. I do not know what ran up my stairs and stood beside my bed, breathing heavily before walking away. I do not know if I am losing my mind, or if I am being haunted, or if there is some third explanation that I have not considered, because I do not have the knowledge or framework to understand what is happening to me. What I know is that the experiences are real. The fear is real. The physical evidence, limited as it is, suggests that something is happening beyond just nightmares or stress-related hallucinations. The security cameras showed me running to my door over and over, but they never showed anyone ringing the bell. That fact alone tells me that whatever I am dealing with is not normal, is not explainable through conventional understanding of how the world works, and I am terrified that it is going to follow me home. That I am going to bring this presence back to my family, back to people I love, back to a place that should be safe. I am going home soon. My contract is ending, and I do not know what is waiting for me when I get there. If you know what this is, if you have experienced anything similar, if you have any insight or advice or understanding to offer, please tell me. Because I am running out of time to figure this out before I bring whatever this is home with me. The cameras never showed anyone ringing my doorbell, but I heard it. Over and over. And the cameras showed me reacting to something they could not capture. That is my story. That is what has been happening to me since I joined the military in 2022. And I do not know if I am losing my mind, or if something is following me. But I know I am afraid. And I know I need help. And I know that in a few weeks I am going home. And whatever this is might be coming with me. Please. If you know what this is, tell me before it is too late. Next one story start now. When a spirit attached itself to me. There are things in this world that most people never see, never experience, and would never believe if you told them. Things that exist in the shadows and the spaces between what we consider real and what we dismiss as impossible. I used to think I understood the paranormal world. I had seen ghosts, experienced hauntings, witnessed things that defied rational explanation. But I didn't truly understand the danger, the very real spiritual warfare that exists all around us, until the day a demonic entity attached itself to me. Until I saw photographic proof of something dark and malevolent clinging to the back of my head as I left a haunted location. That experience taught me that the paranormal is not just interesting or spooky entertainment. It can be genuinely dangerous, especially if you don't understand what you're dealing with or how to protect yourself spiritually. I need to start by explaining what I've learned about the spiritual realm through years of experience and research. This knowledge came at a price, paid in fear and suffering, and hard-won wisdom. But I share it now in the hope that others can learn from my mistakes and protect themselves from the very real dangers that exist in the unseen world around us. First, you need to understand that spirits are not all the same. There are different types of entities, and they operate under different rules and have different capabilities and intentions. Understanding these differences is crucial to protecting yourself and knowing what you're dealing with when you encounter something paranormal. The most common type of paranormal activity is what we call residual hauntings. These are not actually conscious spirits at all. They're more like recordings or echoes of past events. Think of them as energy that got trapped in a specific location during a moment of high emotion or trauma, or simply through repetition of the same action over and over again. This energy plays back like a video on loop, recreating the same scene at the same time, over and over. Residual hauntings are not dangerous because they're not actually aware or conscious. The figures you see in a residual haunting are not ghosts in the traditional sense. They're more like shadows of people who used to be there. Energy imprints that replay without any awareness of the present. You can't interact with a residual haunting because there's nothing there to interact with. It's just energy playing out a pattern. People who witness residual hauntings usually report seeing the same thing at the same time of day or night. They tell the same story even though they experienced it on different occasions and never talked to each other about it beforehand. This consistency is one of the hallmarks of residual activity. It's predictable, repetitive, and unchanging. Then there are intelligent hauntings. These are actual spirits, the consciousness or soul of people who have died, but haven't moved on to whatever comes next. Intelligent spirits can see you and react to you. They can communicate, though usually not through normal speech. They can move objects, create sounds, and make their presence known in various ways. Some intelligent spirits are benign or even helpful. They're just people who died and are confused or attached to a particular location or person. They don't mean any harm and can often be helped to move on through various means. But then there are the dark entities, the demonic spirits that were never human and have nothing but malicious intent toward the living. These entities are dangerous in ways that most people don't understand until it's too late. They are intelligent, strategic, and patient. They study people, learning their weaknesses, their fears, their vulnerabilities. As I learned the hard way, demonic entities sometimes know you better than you know yourself. These dark entities are free-roaming unless something attracts them, or gives them permission to attach themselves to a person or location. And there are many things that can attract them or open doors for them. Speaking certain words or performing certain rituals. Using Ouija boards or other forms of divination. Explicitly inviting spirits to communicate or manifest. Living a life without spiritual protection or beliefs. Leaving yourself vulnerable and unguarded. Even just visiting haunted locations can put you at risk if you're not spiritually prepared and protected. I learned all of this the hard way. And the lesson began at a location that was known to be heavily haunted. A place where I should have been far more careful than I was. About 10 years ago, I was part of an informal group of people interested in the paranormal. We weren't professional ghost hunters or anything official like that. We were just friends who shared an interest in visiting haunted locations taking photos, recording audio, and seeing if we could document any paranormal activity. We thought we were being scientific and methodical. We brought equipment like M50 meters and digital recorders. We documented everything carefully. We thought we knew what we were doing. But none of us were spiritually prepared for what we might encounter. None of us understood the very real spiritual dangers involved in deliberately seeking out contact with the dead. We were like children playing with matches, having no idea that we were standing in a room full of gasoline. The location we visited that night was an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of a small town. The hospital had been closed for decades after a series of scandals and allegations of patient abuse. There were stories of patients dying under suspicious circumstances, of experimental treatments that went horribly wrong, of staff members who took advantage of vulnerable people in their care. The building had a dark history, and that darkness seemed to have soaked into the very walls. Local people avoided the place. There were countless stories of paranormal activity. People reported seeing figures in the windows even though the building was locked and empty. There were sounds of screaming coming from inside. Lights that turned on and off in rooms where the electricity had been shut off years ago. The place had a reputation as one of the most haunted locations in the entire region. We were excited to investigate it. Looking back now, I can see how foolish and naive we were. We were treating the whole thing like an adventure, a fun and spooky experience to tell stories about later. We had no concept of the spiritual danger we were walking into. There were 5 of us that night, myself and 4 friends, all in our mid-20s, all thinking we were brave and clever. We arrived at the abandoned hospital around 10 in the evening, just as it was getting fully dark. The building loomed against the night sky, a massive structure of brick and broken windows. Even from outside, you could feel that something was wrong with the place. The air felt heavy and oppressive. There was a smell, not quite decay, but something organic and unpleasant that made you want to breathe shallowly. We found a way in through a broken door at the back of the building. The interior was dark and filled with debris. Old hospital beds lay scattered in hallways. Broken medical equipment littered the floors. The walls were covered in graffiti and water damage. Ceiling tiles had fallen, exposing pipes and wiring above. It looked like a scene from a horror movie. We split into 2 groups to cover more ground. I went with my friend Sarah, while the other 3 went to explore a different wing of the building. Sarah and I made our way through the corridors, taking photos and recording audio. We were nervous but excited, jumping at every sound, laughing at our own fear. As we explored deeper into the building, I started to feel increasingly uncomfortable. It wasn't just the creepy atmosphere of an abandoned hospital, it was something else, a presence that felt actively hostile. I felt like we were being watched, studied, evaluated. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, to get out of this building as fast as possible. But I ignored those instincts. I told myself I was just being paranoid, letting the spooky atmosphere get to me. Sarah seemed fine, so I didn't want to look like a coward by suggesting we leave. So we kept exploring, going deeper into the building, further from the exit. We reached what appeared to have been the psychiatric ward. This section of the hospital was even more disturbing than the rest. The rooms were smaller, more cell-like. Some still had restraints attached to the walls or beds. There were scratch marks on the walls, deep gouges that looked like they had been made by fingernails. In one room, someone had written the same phrase over and over again on the wall in what looked like dried blood, though it was probably just paint. The phrase was, "Let me out, let me out, let me out," repeated hundreds of times. Sarah wanted to take photos of the room with the writing. While she was setting up her shot, I wandered a bit further down the hallway. At the end of the corridor was a heavy metal door with a small window at eye level. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see darkness beyond it. I don't know what made me walk toward that door. I should have stayed with Sarah. I should have suggested we leave this section and go back to the others. But I felt drawn to that door, pulled toward it by something I couldn't explain or resist. I pushed the door open and stepped through. Beyond was a stairwell leading down to what must have been a basement level. The air coming up from below was cold and dank, smelling of mold and something else. Something that made my stomach turn. And from down below, I could hear sounds. Not mechanical sounds, or the settling of an old building. These were voices, whispering in a language I didn't recognize. And underneath the whispers was something that sounded like laughter, cruel and mocking. That's when I should have run. That's when every alarm in my body was telling me to get away from that stairwell, out of that building, and never come back. But I didn't run. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, unable to move or look away from the darkness below. And then I felt it. Something touched the back of my head. Not physically, not like a hand or a solid object. It was more like a cold pressure, a sensation of something pressing against my skull and then entering, pushing into my head, into my mind, wrapping itself around my thoughts. The feeling was so shocking and violating that it broke the paralysis. I stumbled backward away from the stairwell and slammed the metal door shut. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, my heart racing. What had just happened? Had I imagined it? Was it just fear playing tricks on my mind? Sarah appeared in the hallway behind me. There you are. I was calling for you. Didn't you hear me? I shook my head. I hadn't heard anything except the whispers and laughter from the stairwell. We need to leave, I told her. Now, something's wrong here. Sarah looked at me with concern. Are you okay? You look really pale. I'm fine, I lied. I just think we should get out of here. We made our way back through the building to where we had agreed to meet up with the others. They were already there, looking excited and eager to share what they had experienced. They had gotten some interesting EMF readings and thought they had captured some EVPs on their audio recorder. They wanted to stay longer and explore more. But I insisted we needed to leave. I didn't explain why, didn't tell them what I had felt at the stairwell. I just said I wasn't feeling well and needed to go. Reluctantly, they agreed. As we were leaving the building, my friend Marcus took photos of each of us standing in front of the hospital. It was meant to be a memento of our investigation, proof that we had been there. I stood in the designated spot and smiled for the camera, trying to act normal even though I felt deeply unsettled and wrong. We drove home, and I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. I had just scared myself in a creepy location. There was nothing to worry about. I would go home, get some sleep, and feel better in the morning. But I didn't feel better in the morning. I felt worse. I woke up with a pounding headache and a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I felt like something was watching me constantly, even when I was alone in my apartment. I started having nightmares, vivid and disturbing dreams of dark places and shadowy figures. Over the next few days, things got progressively worse. I became irritable and angry for no reason. I snapped at friends and coworkers. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I felt exhausted all the time but couldn't sleep properly. When I did manage to fall asleep, the nightmares were waiting for me. I started hearing things. Whispers when no one was around. Footsteps in my apartment when I was the only one there. Once I heard someone call my name in a voice I didn't recognize, but when I turned around, there was no one there. My friends noticed the change in me. They asked if I was okay, if something was wrong. But I didn't know how to explain what I was experiencing. I didn't even fully understand it myself. I just knew that something was very, very wrong, and it had started the night we visited that abandoned hospital. About a week after our investigation, Marcus posted the photos from that night to our group chat. There were pictures of all of us standing in various locations throughout the hospital. Pictures of empty hallways and rooms, and the final set of photos taken outside as we were leaving. I was scrolling through them on my phone, not paying too much attention, when I got to the photo of me standing outside the hospital. And I froze. Because there, visible in the photograph, was something that shouldn't have been there. Attached to the back of my head was a dark mass. It wasn't a shadow from the lighting or a smudge on the lens. It was clearly a distinct entity, a shapeless darkness that appeared to be clinging to me. It had what looked like tendrils or appendages that wrapped around my head and down my neck. The longer I stared at it, the more detail I could see. There were suggestions of a face within the darkness. Features that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. My hands started shaking. This was proof. Photographic evidence that something had attached itself to me that night at the hospital. The sensation I had felt at the stairwell, the feeling of something entering my head, had been real. And whatever it was still with me. I showed the photo to Sarah, who had been with me that night. Her face went pale when she saw it. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said. "But I think it's been with me since that night. Since I went to that stairwell." Sarah immediately started researching spiritual attachment and how to remove negative entities. We found information about demonic oppression and possession, about how dark entities can attach themselves to people and feed off their energy, their fear, their life force. We learned that going to haunted locations without spiritual protection is incredibly dangerous. That entities, especially demonic ones, can take advantage of people who are spiritually vulnerable. That these beings are intelligent and strategic, looking for opportunities to attach themselves to the living. We also learned about residual hauntings and how demonic entities can use them to their advantage. They can hide within residual activity, masking their presence. They can take the form of innocent-looking spirits, even appearing as children to lower people's defenses. Ghost hunters and paranormal investigators are particularly susceptible because they actively seek out spirits without understanding the spiritual warfare they're engaging in. The more I learned, the more terrified I became. I had walked into that hospital with no protection, no understanding of what I was dealing with, no spiritual preparation. I had been like a sheep, walking into a den of wolves, completely unaware of the danger, until it was too late. I knew I needed help, real help, from someone who understood the spiritual realm. I reached out to a local priest who had experience with this kind of thing. When I showed him the photo and described what I had been experiencing, his face became very serious. "This is a demonic attachment," he told me. "The entity latched onto you when you were in that hospital. It's been feeding off your energy and trying to weaken you spiritually. If left unchecked, this kind of attachment can progress to oppression and eventually possession." The word possession sent a chill through me. I had thought possession was just something from movies, an exaggeration or fiction. But the priest explained that it was very real and very dangerous. That demonic entities seek to possess people, to take control of their bodies and use them for malevolent purposes. "How do I get rid of it?" I asked desperately. The priest explained that removing a demonic attachment required prayer, fasting, and spiritual cleansing. He performed a blessing over me and gave me prayers to say daily. He instructed me to avoid all paranormal investigation, all contact with the occult, anything that might give the entity more power or invitation to stay attached to me. Over the following weeks, I did everything the priest instructed. I prayed constantly. I wore blessed religious items. I had my apartment blessed and cleansed. Slowly, very slowly, things began to improve. The nightmares became less frequent. The sense of being watched faded. The anger and irritability lifted. It took almost 3 months before I felt completely free of the attachment. 3 months of spiritual warfare, of fighting against something I couldn't see, but could definitely feel. 3 months of learning the hard way that the paranormal is not a game or entertainment. I still have that photo. I keep it as a reminder of how dangerous spiritual ignorance can be. When I look at it now, I can still see the dark entity attached to the back of my head, its tendrils wrapped around me. But I can also see how naive and unprepared I was, standing there smiling for the camera with no idea of what I was carrying with me. That experience completely changed my relationship with the paranormal. I stopped doing investigations. I stopped seeking out haunted locations. I realized that I had been treating the spiritual realm like a curiosity or a hobby, not understanding that it's a battlefield where very real warfare takes place constantly. I learned that spirits are indeed free roaming unless something attracts them or gives them permission to attach. I learned that words have power, that certain practices like divination or using spirit boards open doors that are very hard to close. I learned that living without spiritual beliefs or protection leaves you vulnerable to entities that are looking for exactly that kind of weakness. I learned that demonic entities do know you better than you know yourself sometimes. They study you, learn your weaknesses, your fears, your vulnerabilities. They're patient and strategic, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And they're very, very good at what they do. I learned that spirits can absolutely attach themselves to you, that they can follow you home from haunted locations, can latch onto your energy, can begin a process of oppression that can lead to terrible consequences if not addressed. I learned that residual hauntings, while not dangerous themselves, can be used by intelligent and demonic entities as camouflage. A demonic spirit might hide within the residual energy, appearing harmless, waiting for someone to let their guard down. I learned that demonic spirits absolutely can and do take the form of children. They know that people are more likely to trust and approach a child spirit, that our natural instinct is to help and protect children. This is one of many deceptive tactics they use to target people for oppression and possession. And most importantly, I learned that ghost hunters and paranormal investigators are extremely susceptible to spiritual attack if they're not spiritually fit and protected. Because they deliberately seek out contact with the spirit world without understanding what they're actually dealing with or how to protect themselves. They're not equipped to recognize demonic entities or fight against them. As I had asked myself during my own attachment, if you can't see what you're up against, how will you fight it off? Since my experience, I've tried to educate others about these dangers. I share my story and my photo with people who are interested in paranormal investigation, hoping to spare them from making the same mistakes I did. Some people listen and take precautions. Others dismiss my warnings, thinking they know better or that they'll be fine. To those who dismiss the warnings, I say, please research thoroughly. Understand what you're getting into before you seek out the paranormal. Learn about spiritual protection. Develop your faith and your spiritual defenses. Never go into haunted locations casually or without preparation. The spiritual realm is real. Demons are real. Spiritual warfare is real. And the consequences of being unprepared can be devastating. I was lucky. My attachment was caught relatively early, and I had access to help from someone who understood what was happening and how to address it. But not everyone is so fortunate. Some people suffer with attachments for years, their lives slowly destroyed, without ever understanding what's happening to them. Some people progress from attachment to oppression to full possession, losing themselves completely to the entity that has taken control. This is not meant to scare people unnecessarily, but it is meant to wake people up to the very real dangers that exist in the spiritual realm. The paranormal is not entertainment. It's not a game. It's not something to be taken lightly or approached casually. If you're going to investigate haunted locations or seek contact with spirits, You must be spiritually prepared. You must have faith and protection. You must understand what you're dealing with and how to defend yourself. Otherwise, you're putting yourself at terrible risk. The photo of me leaving that haunted hospital, with a demonic entity clearly attached to the back of my head, serves as proof not just to me but to anyone who sees it. Proof that these entities are real. Proof that they can attach to people. Proof that the paranormal is far more dangerous than most people realize. I share this story and this warning in the hope that it will help others avoid the mistake I made. The spiritual realm is real and must be respected. Demons are real and must be defended against. Spiritual warfare is real and must be fought with proper weapons and armor. Godspeed to all those who find themselves in this battle. May you be protected, prepared, and victorious against the forces of darkness that seek to harm you. And may my experience serve as a warning that hopefully will save others from the same terrifying ordeal that I endured. The paranormal is real. The danger is real. The need for spiritual protection is real. Please take this seriously. Your eternal soul may depend on it. Last one story start now. My sister's eyes turned completely black after watching a screamer video, and when I held her hand it felt like touching a corpse. My sister turned her head toward me very fast and looked directly at me with eyes that were completely black. No iris, no white, just solid darkness, and her hand in mine felt exactly like touching someone who had died. That specific cold that I would only recognize years later after attending funerals and understanding what death feels like against your skin. That is the image that has stayed with me across all the years since that night. The moment that convinced me beyond any doubt that what I witnessed was not a medical emergency or a psychological episode but something spiritual and demonic. Something that entered my sister's body after she watched a seemingly innocent internet video, and that required a pastor and prayers and spiritual intervention to remove. I was very young when it happened. Young enough that I did not have the framework to understand what I was seeing, but old enough that the memory is crystal clear, permanently etched into my mind with a clarity that has not faded despite the passage of time, and despite my family's collective decision to never speak about what happened that night. I have gone back and forth for years about whether to share this story. It is not something I talk about casually or mention to people who do not know me well. I am keeping everything anonymous and vague in this telling because I do not want this tied back to me or to my family. Do not want to expose people I love to questions or scrutiny or skepticism about an experience that was traumatic enough without having to defend it to strangers on the internet. I have only ever talked about this with close relatives, with the people who were there that night and who saw what I saw. But I am telling it now because I think there are other people out there who have witnessed things that fall outside normal explanation, who have seen family members or friends go through experiences that conventional medicine and psychology cannot account for. And I want those people to know they are not alone, and they are not crazy for believing what they saw was real, even if the world tells them it could not have happened. This happened when I was very young, but old enough to form clear memories. Old enough to understand that something terrible was happening even if I could not articulate exactly what it was. My family is Christian. We believe in God, attend church regularly, pray together, live according to our faith in ways both big and small. This context matters because it shaped how we interpreted what happened and how we responded to it. And because our faith tradition gave us a framework for understanding experiences that other worldviews might categorize differently or dismiss entirely. At the time, we lived in a house where the living room and kitchen were one open space. This layout is important to the story because it means that everyone was in the same general area that night, that we could see and hear each other, that what happened to my sister happened in front of multiple witnesses who were all paying attention. We had an old family desktop computer set up in the living room near the television. This was back when desktop computers were the primary way most families accessed the internet, before laptops and tablets and smartphones made individual internet access ubiquitous. The computer was in a central location because it was a shared resource that everyone in the family used for homework, communication, entertainment, and whatever else required internet access. One night, my oldest sister was on the computer. Both of my parents were home. My siblings and I were all in the same area, doing whatever kids do in the evening when the family is together. Watching TV, playing, talking, the normal background noise and activity of a household with multiple children. My oldest sister was watching one of those pop-up scare videos that were extremely popular on the internet back then. For readers who may not remember or who were not online during that era, these were videos that would show innocent or boring content for a while, and then suddenly cut to a frightening image, often accompanied by a loud scream or disturbing sound, designed to startle the unsuspecting viewer. They were shared widely, often as pranks, people sending links to friends or family with some innocent-sounding description to trick them into watching. My sister called me over to watch the video she had pulled up. I came over and watched. The scare happened, the sudden frightening image and sound that these videos were designed around. I got startled, jumped a little, laughed it off the way you do when something surprises you but does not genuinely frighten you, and then went back to playing. My oldest sister then called another one of my sisters over to the computer, without warning her about what kind of video it was. She was pranking her, essentially wanting to see her reaction to the scare that was coming. This was not unusual behavior for siblings, especially back then when these videos were new, and sharing them was considered funny rather than cruel. I was not watching them directly at that moment. I had already seen the video and gone back to whatever I had been doing before being called over. But suddenly I heard my sister scream, at the top of her lungs. Not a startled yelp or a laugh scream like you make when something surprises you in a fun way. A genuine scream of terror, loud and uncontrolled and wrong in a way that immediately got everyone's attention. I turned around. My sister was visibly shaking. Her whole body was trembling. Her face was pale. Her expression was one of absolute terror. This was not the normal reaction to a jump scare video. This was something else. Something that had gone wrong in a way that none of us understood yet. My mom immediately ran to her and grabbed her, the way mothers do when they sense their child is in distress, that instinctive movement toward protection and comfort. My dad started yelling, demanding to know what she had been shown, what was on that computer screen, what had caused this reaction. His voice was loud and urgent, the tone he used when something was seriously wrong, and he needed information immediately. Everything escalated very quickly from that point. Within seconds, the atmosphere in the house had gone from normal family evening to crisis. Everyone moving and talking, and trying to understand what was happening. My sister was shaking uncontrollably. Not just trembling, but shaking with an intensity that looked involuntary. Like her body was reacting to something beyond her conscious control. And then suddenly, while my mom was holding her, she went limp. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her body lost all tension. She went from violently shaking to completely limp in the span of a moment. I remember looking at my mom's face and seeing an expression I had never seen before. My mother is a strong woman, not someone who panics easily or who shows fear in front of her children. But in that moment she looked terrified, genuinely, deeply frightened in a way that scared me more than my sister's shaking had scared me. Because if my mom was that afraid, then something was very wrong. My mom called our pastor. Late at night, outside normal office hours, she called him and told him we needed to see him immediately. This was not a request for a counseling session or a scheduled meeting. This was an emergency. The kind of situation where you call your spiritual leader in the middle of the night because you need help that only they can provide. While my dad got the car ready, preparing to take us all to the church, my mom sent me into a bedroom with my sister. I do not know why she chose me specifically, whether it was because I was close in age to my sister, or because the other siblings were too young or too old, or because she needed someone to stay with her and I was available. But she sent us into the bedroom together and left us there while she finished preparing to leave. I sat next to my sister on the bed. She was still limp, still unresponsive, her body present but her consciousness seemingly absent or diminished. I held her hand, trying to comfort her the only way I knew how as a young child. I did not understand what was happening or how to help, but I knew that holding someone's hand was supposed to make them feel better, was supposed to communicate that they were not alone. I remember quietly telling her, "It's okay. Everything's going to be okay." The words felt inadequate even as I said them. Felt like a lie because clearly everything was not okay. But I said them anyway because I did not know what else to say. What still haunts me, what I have never been able to forget or rationalize away, is how cold she felt. Her hand in mine was not just cool or chilly the way hands get when someone is cold. It was cold in a way that did not feel alive. Cold in a way that felt wrong. That felt like something essential was missing. Years later, after attending funerals, after having the unfortunate but inevitable experiences that come with getting older and losing people you love, I realized what that cold had reminded me of. It felt exactly like touching someone who had passed away. That specific temperature and texture that dead flesh has, that absence of the warmth that indicates blood flow and metabolism in life. My sister's hand felt like that. While she was sitting next to me, while her body was present and breathing, and technically alive, her hand felt like death. I was still holding her hand, still sitting close to her trying to provide whatever comfort a child can provide, when she suddenly turned her head. Very fast, much faster than a normal head turn, with a speed and precision that looked mechanical or inhuman. She looked directly at me, and her eyes were completely black. Not the normal black of a dilated pupil surrounded by colored iris and white sclera. Completely black. Solid darkness filling the entire visible eye. No differentiation between parts. No light reflecting off the surface. Just black. I remember the feeling that came over me when I saw those eyes looking at me. An overwhelming sense that whatever I was looking at was not my sister. This was not the person whose hand I was holding, whose presence I had known my entire life. This was something else. Something that was using her body, that was looking at me through her eyes, that was present in a way that felt predatory and malevolent and wrong. And yet, at the same time, it was still her. Her face, her body, her hand in mine. The paradox of it, the simultaneous recognition and non-recognition, was more disturbing than if it had been an obviously different entity. Because I was looking at my sister and not my sister at the same time, seeing both things superimposed in a way that my young mind could barely process. Now that I am older, now that I have a framework for understanding these kinds of experiences through my faith tradition, I believe she was possessed in that moment. That whatever she had felt jump into her body when she watched that video was in control, was using her eyes to look at me, was present in a way that temporarily displaced or suppressed her own consciousness. We drove to the church. All of us, the whole family, making the trip late at night, because my mom had called the pastor and told him this could not wait until morning. I do not remember much about the drive itself, just that we were all quiet, all processing in our own ways what was happening. When we arrived at the church and went inside, a teenager who was there, probably the pastor's child or someone helping out, tried to assist. This person approached my sister and gently touched her hands, maybe trying to lead her somewhere, or just trying to make contact, trying to help in whatever way they could think of. But the moment my sister looked at this teenager, the moment those black eyes focused on them, they backed away immediately, stepped back quickly, their body language changing from helpful to frightened, and went to get the pastor without saying anything to us. Whatever they saw in my sister's eyes had scared them enough to retreat and get adult help immediately. We were brought into the main area of the church, into the sanctuary or worship space where services were normally held. My parents told me everything was fine, using the calm voices parents use when they are trying to keep their children from panicking. When they are trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, even though the situation is anything but normal. But I knew it was not fine. I was young, but I was not stupid. I could see the fear in the adults' faces, could feel the tension in the room, could sense that something terrible was happening, even if no one was explaining it to me directly. I sat behind my dad while the pastor and others, possibly church elders, or other people experienced in spiritual warfare, began to pray over my sister. They were not praying gentle bedside prayers or routine blessings. They were rebuking whatever was inside her, using language of spiritual authority, commanding in the name of God that whatever entity had taken possession of my sister's body needed to leave immediately. This is a practice in many Christian traditions, particularly charismatic or Pentecostal denominations. This idea that demons can possess people, and that prayer and faith, and invoking God's name, can force those demons to depart. I did not understand the theology at the time, but I understood that the adults were fighting something, that they were engaged in a battle that was invisible, but real. When my sister began screaming, the sound that came out was not her voice at all. It was deep, distorted, unrecognizable, nothing like the voice I had heard from her thousands of times before. It sounded like it was coming from something else using her vocal cords, something that did not have a human voice of its own and was creating sound through borrowed anatomy in a way that produced something wrong and disturbing. She kept screaming, "It hurts, it hurts," over and over, this phrase that sounded like a plea, or a protest, or an expression of agony. Years later, when I finally got the courage to ask my sister about that night, she told me something that explained the screaming. She said she was not in pain. She could feel what was happening to her body, but she was not experiencing physical suffering. Whatever was inside her, whatever entity had possessed her, was the one screaming. It was the demon or spirit, or whatever we want to call it, that was in pain, that was being hurt by the prayers and the spiritual warfare that was being waged against it. At some point during the screaming and the praying, my dad picked me up, lifted me off the ground and held me, trying to block my view of what was happening to my sister. He told me not to look, using that firm parental voice that expects obedience, that is trying to protect a child from seeing something they should not see. I looked anyway, because I was a child, and children do not always obey even when they should, and because I needed to see, needed to understand what was happening, even if understanding came at the cost of being traumatized. I saw my sister twitching, moving in ways that did not look normal or human, crawling or writhing or contorting. I am not sure exactly how to describe the movements except to say they looked wrong. Looked like something was controlling her body without understanding how human bodies are supposed to move, or what limitations they are supposed to have. I remember hugging my dad tightly, pressing my face against him, frozen with fear, wanting to look away but unable to, wanting to leave but unable to move, just holding on to my father because he was solid and safe and normal in a situation where nothing else was. I do not know how long the prayers lasted. Time becomes strange in traumatic situations, stretches or compresses in ways that make it hard to gauge duration accurately. It might have been an hour. It might have been less. It felt eternal while it was happening. And then it was over. The screaming stopped. My sister's body stopped moving in those wrong ways. She went still and then slowly seemed to come back to herself, seemed to return to her own body and consciousness. After that night, no one talked about it again. Not at home, not with extended family, not with friends. It was as if the entire family had made an unspoken agreement that what had happened was too frightening to discuss, too outside normal experience to integrate into our regular conversations and memories. We went back to our regular lives. My sister went back to being a normal kid. The computer stayed in the living room. Life continued as if that night had never happened, at least on the surface. But I never forgot. The memory stayed with me, clear and vivid, even as other childhood memories faded or became confused. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. And even though no one was talking about it, I knew that everyone else remembered too, that we were all carrying this shared experience that we had collectively decided not to acknowledge. Years later, when I was older and better able to have serious conversations about difficult topics, I finally asked my sister what had happened that night, what she had experienced, what it had felt like, what she remembered about an event that had shaped both our lives, even though we had never discussed it. She told me that when she watched the video, when the scare happened and the frightening image and sound hit her, she felt something jump into her body. This was not metaphorical or symbolic language. She felt a physical sensation of something external entering her, taking up residence inside her physical form. Everything went black. Her vision cut out, her sense of being in her body disappeared. She felt like she was watching herself from outside, like she had been ejected from her own flesh, and was now an observer rather than the person experiencing things directly. She said she could see both herself and whatever was inside her, could perceive her body moving and speaking, but was not in control of those movements or words. Could sense another presence occupying the space she normally occupied, using her body as a vehicle. She also told me something that made me understand why she had looked at me with those black eyes. She said that when she turned her head toward me that night, when I was sitting on the bed holding her hand, she was scared, terrified, not for herself but for me, because she was afraid that whatever had possessed her was going to go after me next, was going to use her body to attack me, or to transfer itself into me, or to harm me in some way. That look, those black eyes staring at me, was both the demon looking through her and her consciousness behind it, desperately hoping I would not be its next target. When the prayers ended, when the pastor and the others had completed their work of driving out whatever entity had taken residence in her body, she suddenly felt like she was back. Back in her body, back in control, back to being herself. But exhausted, terrified, afraid it would happen again, that whatever had possessed her once could possess her again, that she was somehow vulnerable to this kind of attack in a way she had not been before that night. To this day she barely talks about it. When pressed, when asked directly by family members who were there, she will only say it was the worst experience of her life. Worse than any physical pain, worse than any emotional trauma, worse than anything else she has gone through in all the years since. And I understand why. Because I was only an observer that night, only a witness to what happened to her, and it was still the most frightening thing I have ever experienced. I cannot imagine what it must have been like to be the person it happened to lose control of your own body, to be displaced by something else, to experience possession from the inside. I am not trying to convince anyone of anything by telling this story. I understand that many people do not believe in demons or possession or spiritual warfare. I understand that there are psychological and neurological explanations that could potentially be applied to what my sister experienced. Seizures, dissociative episodes, extreme panic attacks, any number of medical conditions that might produce symptoms that look similar to what we witnessed. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know how cold her hand was, how black her eyes were, how wrong her voice sounded, how inhuman her movements looked. And I know that the intervention that ended the episode was not medical but spiritual. Was not medication or restraint but prayer and faith in the authority of God invoked against something that was understood to be demonic. As a Christian, I believe this was something spiritual and demonic. I believe that my sister was possessed by an evil spirit that entered her when she watched that video. Whether because the video itself was cursed, or because watching it at that particular moment in that particular state of mind opened her up to something that had been waiting for an opportunity to attack. I believe the prayers worked because they were addressing the actual problem. Because the people praying understood what they were dealing with and had the spiritual authority and faith to confront it. And I believe that God protected me that night, that when those black eyes looked at me and my sister's consciousness was terrified I would be next, something prevented the demon from transferring to me or attacking me or using my sister's body to harm me. This is something I have never been able to forget or fully explain using any framework other than the one my faith provides. And it is something that has shaped my understanding of spiritual reality in ways that are profound and permanent. The world contains more than we can see. Evil exists in forms that are not physical. And faith and prayer are not just comforting rituals, but actual weapons in a battle that most people do not even realize is happening around them constantly. My sister's eyes turned completely black after watching a screamer video. Her hand felt like death in mine. A pastor prayed, and the demon left. These are facts, experiences, events that happened in front of multiple witnesses and that cannot be undone or explained away, no matter how uncomfortable they make people who prefer to believe such things are impossible. I am telling this story because it is true. Because my family lived through it. Because the memory has stayed with me clear and sharp across all the years since that night. And because I want anyone else who has witnessed something similar to know they are not alone. They are not crazy. And their experience was real, even if the world tells them it could not have been. My sister looked at me with completely black eyes. And I will never forget it.